Sketching is a foundation to creating 3D geometry in xDesign. Many features require sketches as the base geometry, including the most fundamental features such as an extrude, a revolve, a sweep, or a loft. This makes it extremely important to know how to use a variety of sketch commands and relate them together properly. In this lesson, I'll focus on three separate aspects of sketching: using the main types of sketch entities, adding constraints between sketch entities, and then adding dimensions to size and position them. The most common types of sketch entities are lines, rectangles, arcs, and circles. I'll walk through how to sketch each of these sketch entities and the different commands for each one. The most common sketch constraints are the vertical and horizontal constraints, the coincident constraint, collinear constraint, midpoint constraint, tangent constraint, concentric constraint, and switching a sketch entity to be construction geometry. Once you've gotten to see how to add constraints, I'll show you how to add dimensions to set the sizes of all the sketch elements. I'll show you how to create linear distance dimensions, angle dimensions, radius dimensions, and diameter dimensions. These steps will get you ready to apply all the necessary elements when creating your own sketches. Here I have a new file open in xDesign. You can see the three planes showing on screen: the XY, YZ, and ZX planes. Any of these can be used to start a sketch. For example, if I want to start a new sketch on the XY plane, I can click the Create Edit Sketch command here on the Sketch tab of the Action bar, and then select the XY plane. This automatically rotates the view to face normal to the sketch plane. This happens whenever you begin a new sketch on a plane. If you happen to rotate out of this normal view, you can go back to it either by clicking this Normal to button or by pressing the N key. Now I'm ready to start sketching. The four main sketch entity types used in sketches are shown here in the action bar, which are lines, rectangles, arcs, and circles. I'll go through each of these in this order. Lines are the most basic sketch entity used to create sketch profiles. To enable the line command, either click on the command here or press the L key on the keyboard. Lines can be drawn using three different techniques. To create an individual line, you can click, move the mouse to where you want the endpoint, and then double-click or press the Escape key to end the line. As you can see, this line can be created at any angle and has no other geometry being created once I double-clicked. Another way of making this same individual line is by clicking and holding the mouse button at the first endpoint, then moving over to the location of the other endpoint with the mouse button still held down, and releasing the mouse to create the other endpoint. Lines can also be sketched connected to one another. To do this, simply click, move the mouse, and click once to place the endpoint. Note that the line command is still enabled. From here you can move and continue to single-click to place more line segments. There are two types of rectangles that can be created: a regular rectangle or a center rectangle. The regular rectangle can be sketched by clicking to place one corner, moving the mouse, and clicking once to place the other corner. These corners are always diagonal from one another, as you've seen here. The center rectangle can be sketched by clicking where the center of the rectangle should be located, and then clicking once more to place the location of one of the corners. This will always produce a rectangle with horizontal and vertical sides, as well as automatic center lines, no matter where you move the mouse to place the corner. The next sketch entity I'd like to cover is the arc. There are three different types of arc commands you can use. The three-point arc command is created by clicking at the locations of the two endpoints of the arc, and then clicking to place a third point somewhere along the length of the arc. This third point controls how large or small the radius of the arc will be. The center arc is created by first clicking to place the center point of the arc, then clicking in 2 more locations to define the endpoints of the arc. Note that the distance between the first click, which sets the center point, and the second click, which sets the first endpoint of the arc, will determine the constant radius used for this arc. The third arc type is the tangent arc, which creates an arc tangent to an existing line or curve. This sketch entity is created by clicking on the endpoint of an existing sketch segment, then clicking to place the other endpoint. Notice that the radius of the arc is determined by where you place the second point, which is because it's made tangent to the first sketch entity connected to the arc. The fourth main sketch entity is the circle command. There are 2 types of circles you can sketch: the center circle and the 3-point circle. As you may be able to guess, the center circle is created by first clicking on the center point, then clicking once more to place the radius of the circle. As the name suggests, the 3-point circle is created by clicking to place 3 different points around the edge of the circle. These points can be connected to other sketch entities or can be free-floating. Before wrapping up, I want to show you one more useful sketching tool: the Sketch Fillet command. This command will round the corner and create an arc where 2 sketch segments were connected. The arc will be made tangent to both sketch entities. To create a sketch fillet, you can either click and hold the mouse while dragging over sketch segments that meet at a corner, including multiple corners in a row. Click on the endpoint at the corner, or you can click on the 2 segments that connect at the corner. Notice that when I rotate the view, all these sketch segments are contained in the XY plane I selected when I began sketching. From here, any of these sketch profiles can be used to create 3D geometry, such as this rectangle with filleted corners. Here I have a sketch in xDesign that doesn't have any dimensions added. This sketch is intended to create a mount for a vertical rod, which would be revolved around this left edge to make the 3D geometry. Some of these sketch entities have relations that were added as the sketch was created, but I want to use some additional relations to clean things up and make sure the right design intent is in place. First, I want to make sure all of the vertical and horizontal lines are set. Notice when I click this line on the left, the vertical relation icon appears next to the line. Similarly, this horizontal line has the relation icon showing when I click on it. I want this shorter line segment here to be vertical. Whenever you want to add a relation to sketch entities, you first want to select all the sketch entities on screen, which brings up a context toolbar with the available relations that can be applied. For this one, I'll select vertical, and for this line here, I'll select horizontal. I quickly want to mention that you can see the sketch constraints existing in the sketch simply by clicking on a sketch element. So if I click on this line, the icon appears on screen, letting me know which constraint type has been applied. If needed, this constraint can be deleted either by selecting it graphically and pressing Delete, or by clearing it in the context toolbar. The next relation I want to add is to make this top corner of the thin rectangle coincident with the top corner of the outer sketch profile. As you saw, the relation can be chosen once the sketch segments are selected. To choose multiple sketch segments, hold the Control key, click on both corner points, and the coincident relation is available. This snaps the corners of the rectangle into place and makes them overlapping no matter the size. Now I want to make the bottom edge of the thin rectangle collinear with this horizontal line. I'll hold the Control key and select both of them. Then choose the collinear option in the context menu. And now these lines will remain collinear with one another, no matter where they're positioned. This vertical rod mount will be created using a revolve feature, and this thin rectangle will create the cutout where the rod fits into place. The design intent of this part is to make sure the cutout is half the diameter of the top face. This means that this point on the rectangle needs to be set as the midpoint along the top edge. To add this relation, I'll hold the Control key, select the point and the top edge, and click on the midpoint relation icon. A key aspect of creating revolved features is making sure the surface geometry is smooth and doesn't have awkward edges. This means I need to make sure that this arc is tangent on both sides with the vertical and horizontal lines. I'll add the first tangent relation by selecting the arc and the vertical line and choosing tangent. I'll make sure to select the arc again and the horizontal line and select tangent once more. Let's say I want to add a construction line that shows that these two lines are in fact collinear. I can easily draw a line connecting them. And then switch it to construction geometry by selecting the construction line icon. This can be enabled for any segment in a sketch. This sketch doesn't actually need any circles included in the sketch, but I briefly want to show you the concentric sketch relation. I'll quickly draw a circle, and if needed, I could make it concentric with this arc by selecting them both using the Control key and choosing this concentric option in the context menu. As I mentioned, I don't need this circle in the sketch, so I'll click on it and press Delete. From here, I could add dimensions to fully define the sketch and make sure the geometry is set. And then I could create the revolve geometry, which I'll quickly step through. And the 3D geometry is created from the sketch and its relations. As you saw in the last video, constraints are one way to define the size and relationships between sketch objects. This allows them to adjust in specific ways, depending on how the geometry is updated. Adding dimensions is the other aspect of defining the size and relationships between sketch objects. Dimensions allow you to specify the exact size of the sketch elements, which include adding dimensions for linear distances, angles between lines, sizes of radii, and diameters of circles. I'll show you how each of these can be added to the sketch I used in the last video, which will fully define the sketch in the end. To enable the dimension command, simply click on the button here in the action bar. With the button active, the cursor updates to show the dimension icon, and I can begin selecting sketch entities. The first type of dimension I want to add is the linear distance dimension. There are a few ways a linear distance dimension can be created. The most common way is to simply click on a single line and click to place that dimension in free space. Then type in the dimension value, which I'll set as 150 millimeters. Now, the entire height of this line is defined in space. I'll do this again for this bottom line, which I'll set to 180 millimeters. And I'll set this edge to be 25 millimeters tall. Another way to set a linear dimension is to select two lines that are parallel to one another. This will set the distance between them. For instance, if I want to set the distance between the bottom edge and this line here, I can select the bottom edge and then click on this line right after, which allows me to set the distance between them, in this case set to 60 millimeters. I'll also set the distance between the edge on the left and this vertical line here. I'll click the left edge, then the other vertical line, and set the distance to be 105 millimeters. Another way is to select a line and a point. For example, I want to set the distance between this left edge and this point at the bottom of the angled line, which will determine the diameter at the base of the angled face of the revolve feature. To do this, I'll click the line on the left and the point at the bottom of the angled line. and set the distance to be 70 millimeters. The last way to create a linear distance dimension is to select 2 points. This can come up whenever a dimension needs to be set between 2 points that aren't connected by horizontal and vertical lines. For example, let's say I wanted to set a dimension between the upper left corner and the center point of the arc. I'll click the first point, then the second point, and I can set the dimension a few different ways. I can set the horizontal distance between them, the vertical distance, or the direct distance between the 2 points. I'll set the direct distance in this case. This distance, however, was just to show you the options when dimensioning between 2 points, so I'll click Undo to remove it. The next type of dimension I'd like to focus on is creating an angle dimension. Creating an angle dimension is as simple as selecting 2 lines that aren't parallel to one another. In this case, I want to set the angle of this line relative to the vertical edge on the left. All I do is click both lines, and then click to place the angle dimension. In this case, I'll use an angle of 15 degrees. If you ever select 2 lines in xDesign, thinking they're parallel, and an angle dimension appears, this is an indicator that the lines aren't actually parallel. Angle dimensions always appear when lines aren't constrained to be horizontal, vertical, or parallel. The next dimension type I'll add is a radius dimension, which is applied to arcs and fillets in a sketch. This sketch only has 1 arc included, which I'll dimension simply by clicking on it and then clicking to set the radius value. I'll set it to 15 millimeters. Notice that the dimension has the letter R in front of it, indicating that this dimension is setting the radius value of this sketch entity. Notice that all the sketch entities have changed to black, which indicates that the sketch has gone from underdefined to fully defined. This means that the sizes and relationships of all the sketch entities are set in place. They were also all created using the same dimension command. However, I do want to add one more sketch entity to show you how to add a diameter dimension. I'll quickly draw a circle at the midpoint of this line here. This is now the only blue sketch entity showing. I'll click the dimension command, then click on the edge of the circle to set the diameter, and give it a value of 15 millimeters. Notice the diameter icon in front of the numerical value, which indicates that this is specifically a diameter dimension. Now that you've seen the main dimension types added to this sketch, I want to mention another dimension type that can be helpful to include. Driven dimensions are dimensions that don't actually establish the size and relationships of sketch entities, but are driven by other dimensions and show a reference value on screen. For instance, I want to know the total height of the angled line. I can click on the top edge, and then the point at the bottom of the angled line, and place the dimension. This driven dimension appears in gray instead of black, making it easy to differentiate. I also can't set a value since the dimension is determined by the other geometry, currently coming out to be 90 millimeters. I quickly want to show you how you can set the total length of an angled line. I'll click on the angled line shown here, which will create another driven dimension. At first, the same 90 millimeter dimension appears, but if I move the mouse upward, the dimension shifts to be along the angle of the line, indicating its total length. To wrap up, I want to show you how to edit and delete dimensions. To edit a dimension value, simply double-click on the numerical value. I'll change this 150 millimeter dimension to 175 millimeters. All the other black driving dimensions are maintained. However, the values of the driven dimensions update to the new values. I want to delete this angled driven dimension. To delete a dimension, simply click on the leader line of the dimension. Then press the delete key, or click on the trash can icon on the context toolbar. This can be done for any dimension type.